Hello, everyone. We are thrilled to welcome Chef Nico Albert to the KitchenAid Fairway Club demo kitchen today to share with us one of her favorite signature recipes. Chef Nico is a self-taught chef, caterer, and student of traditional indigenous cuisines based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Raised in California and Arizona, Nico returned to the homeland of her mother's people and began to reestablish a relationship with her Cherokee community. Her journey to learn traditional Cherokee ways, in particular foodways, grew to encompass the indigenous cuisines of tribes from all parts of North America and led her to her involvement in indigenous food revitalization and food sovereignty. Now, as the founder and owner of Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods, Nico devotes her time and passion for the revitalization of indigenous cuisine to promote healing and wellness in the Native American community by providing healthy, traditionally inspired catering options and educational events. Her efforts to steadily expand her knowledge of traditional ingredients and techniques continue through research and collaboration with indigenous chefs and traditionalists from all nations. Chef Nico's work has been featured regionally and nationally by the Smithsonian National Museum of American History, PBS, and Food Network, among others. Welcome, Nico.
So the dish I'm going to be sharing with you today is actually a very ancient recipe. So what I do with my company, Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods, is a combination of education and feeding people. So I like to take all of the techniques and the ingredients that we've had for ages, for generations in tribal communities, and kind of bring those into modern cuisine and make modern dishes with them. But today I thought it would be fun to show you how to use some modern techniques to make a very old recipe. So the recipe I'm going to show you today is for a... I'm just projecting, so I'm sure you could still hear me anyway. The recipe that I'm going to be sharing today is for a dish called bean bread. And bean bread is something that Cherokee people would eat with almost every meal. So it's basically a staple food. A lot of our foods come from 3 staple crops that we grow. Should I keep going? All right. The 3 staple crops that a lot of indigenous people, especially in the southeastern region, which is where Cherokee people originated, they grow corn, beans, and squash. And so the corn and beans are the basis for this dish that I'm going to be sharing today. And we use those ingredients in all different kinds of things, and we like to say if they grow together, you can cook them together. So these are called the 3 sisters, and we grow them together in a symbiotic farming type of situation, and then we cook with them together. So this type of bean bread would be used with something like a squash soup or, a venison or turkey stew. It's a great accompaniment to that. So as we get through the dish, you're going to see it looks a little bit familiar, and that's because a lot of different tribal nations have a variation on this dish, including the indigenous people of Mexico. So this dish is going to look a lot like tamales, and it's a very similar preparation. But this is like the Cherokee version, basically. So we're first going to start with the most important part, which is the corn. And I brought 2 different varieties here today.
This is there we are. This is a white corn, and this is a morado or a purple corn. These are just corn that I buy at the Latin American grocery store. There's also a variety of different corn that you can get. A lot of people don't know that there's more corn than just the sweet corn that you buy in the summertime at the grocery store. There's 6 and 7 different varieties of corn. So a lot of the different varieties of corn, aside from sweet corn, are flour corn. And that's what this corn is. So this is the type of corn that you make hominy with, like you would use for pozole or something like that. So there's these different types of corn because they have different types of starch in them. This is a really dense corn. So not something that you would want to eat raw. I mean, it is actually pretty good, you know, fresh green off the cob. That's when we have our green corn celebrations, when we eat the corn right after it's been harvested. And it is tender, but it's not very sweet. This is not a sweet corn. It has a natural sweetness to it, just a little bit, but it's really more of a dense flour type of starchiness. And so this can be ground up and used for cornmeal, or you can do the process that I'm going to show you today. And that process is called nixtamalization. So that is the process of lying the corn. Basically, you are treating the corn with ash or some or other type of alkali to remove the outer hull of the corn. And this is how Native Americans, ages and ages ago, generations ago, developed this scientific process to basically start a chemical reaction in the corn using ingredients that they could find anywhere, which is like the ash from their campfires. This is any kind of hardwood ash. This happens to be oak ash. And we're going to boil the corn in that ash, and it breaks down the outer hull of the corn. And that's how our bodies can absorb the nutrients from this corn. When colonizers first arrived in America, they didn't know about this ancient process. And so they would just eat the corn, you know, they would cook it whole and just eat it right off the cob like this, and your body doesn't absorb the nutrients from that, and so they were developing diseases like pellagra. And now we know that that's because they weren't absorbing any of the good vitamins like niacin that corn contains. So once you strip that outer hull from the corn, human bodies can digest it, and then we can reap all the benefits of eating this indigenous food. So I'm going to show that process to you right now. My water is just about boiling. I'm going to take a strainer here, and this is like, I picked this up this morning from my friends over at Lowwood. There's a restaurant on 3rd Street that I recommend highly. They do some great wood fire cooking, and so I wanted to get the freshest ash that I could get. And after all that rain, none of the ash in my yard from my campfire outdoors was really going to work. So I went and saw my friends over there, and they hooked me up with this. So I'm basically just sifting out all of the bigger chunks of charcoal. And I'm going to make a small batch of this. So we're going to do, you know, usually we would do a huge stock pot of this to, you know, it's a pretty involved process, so you want to do a big batch when you do it. But we're just going to do a small batch for demonstration purposes here. I need about a cup of sifted ash. And this is just from their cooking fire last night, so it's nice and fresh. So that's good. Do we have a trash over here? I'm going to use this as trash. I made a trash. Okay, so I've got my water, and I'm just dumping that straight into the pot. And I'm going to give that a stir to distribute it. And there will often be some bigger pieces of charcoal in there, and that's totally fine because we're going to pick through all of the corn after it cooks too. And really we want this pot at just like a rolling boil. My one in the back is boiling, but this one is not. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and add the corn in. I'm going to do this yellow corn. And we're looking for just about 2 cups. Again, I'm not measuring anything very carefully here. Just know that I have enough. Just a little bit more. So nowadays, when they make hominy, you'll see at sometimes on the Mexican food aisle in grocery stores or in Latin grocery stores in the spice section, you'll see an ingredient called cal. That's lye for lying corn. It's basically like a processed version of this ancient process. So it's a cleaned up version of the ash, but there's nothing simpler than just taking the ash from your actual cooking fire and using it to cook your next batch of food. So this is the simple and older version of doing this. You know, the hominy that you buy in a can, that has been, this exact same process has been treated in giant vats with the processed version of lye, but this is the older version of that, the original. And so this is a process that my ancestors, a lot of our ancestors, came up with. And I don't know the origins of how this process was discovered, but it's really an ingenious way to make the food that you're eating more nutritious for you, and definitely more delicious, because there's nothing better than a nice big bowl of steaming hominy. And you can kind of see, and I'll show you guys, this process is already starting to happen. When I put this white corn in here, it has a reaction with the alkali, which is the component in the ash that causes that chemical reaction that dissolves the outer hull of the corn. So now you can see how orange that is. That's how you can tell that you've got some good active agents working in your ash. If it's older ash, sometimes that's not going to happen as quickly, or you're going to need a lot more ash. So the fresher the better, so that you have to use less of that. And so this is just going to simmer for about 45 minutes to an hour, and you'll see the outer hull start to slip off. It gets really soft, and you can slide it right off of the corn, and that's how you know that it's ready. So I have a pot right here that we can kind of fast forward to. Set that aside. And so this has been cooking a little longer this morning. And you can see how it's turned this really beautiful, bright canary yellow color. And a lot of the hulls are going to slip off right into the pot. But we're going to wash it just to get anything remaining off of there. So I'm going to move this over to my clean water bowls here. Maneuver things around. There we go. So I'm going to reuse my strainer. Usually we would do this in a sink. Since we're doing this for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to use some mixing bowls here, but we're going to strain out that corn. And I'm going to put it directly in this bowl so that I can kind of rub all of those little skins off and be left with some nice plump hominy. And at this point, you could go in different directions with it. You can take this after you've rinsed all of the hulls off of it, and see, that's not too hot. And you can put it back in a pot of fresh broth or clean water, and you can keep cooking it until it's nice and soft and chewy. And then that's the process that you use to make pozole or a traditional corn soup, something like that. You would have hominy that you can eat just from this state. Right now it's a little hard. We've just cooked it long enough to take the outer hull off. But if you cook it a little longer, it gets nice and tender. And I've got people that do, gluten-free, grain-free diets, and this is, I think, a great alternative to something like pasta, because when you're eating a gluten-free diet, when you're trying to cut down on things like that, on pasta and things like of that nature, then you're missing that real chewy texture, that al dente that pasta gets. I like to recommend that you go for some pozole and use the hominy in different ways. It's not just for soup. You can use it as taking the place of pasta, because it has that same texture, that kind of toothy, satisfying texture like that. So I'm just going to take it and rub it between my fingers, and that's going to loosen all of those skins off. And I'll be left with just the corn. And you can rinse this under the faucet, under running water, but it works just fine if you kind of just rinse the ash off, rinse all of those outer skins off. and transfer it to a bowl of clean water for a final rinse. So the other option, I said there were two ways you could take it. You either cook it whole like this, or you can grind it. And that's what we're about to do. You grind this up, and that's how we're going to make our dough. Transfer this. And all the hulls will kind of sink to the bottom. You just bring your clean corn up to the top. And this is something that I've tried to do many times with canned hominy. And there's just no comparison to the process of cooking the corn yourself, because the flavor of canned hominy is, in my opinion, inferior. Just like everything, if you do things the hard way, it's going to taste a lot better, you know, that homemade way. And it just doesn't stick together enough. The hominy in a can is kind of too soft to make a dough out of. But when you do it like this, you're getting it just soft enough to get the hull off, but still raw enough in the center to make a good kind of mealy dough, which is exactly what we want. We want that masa feeling where it's still got a little bit of grain to it. Just like that. And I'll show you, you can see how that hull is just slipping right off. That's what your body can't digest. That's what encases the whole seed and keeps the nutrients from you. And then we just did this process that allowed us to take it off and set all those nutrients free. It's pretty cool. So the next step here is the grinding. So traditionally, the Cherokee people have kind of an apparatus, I guess you would call it, a device called a kanona. And basically, if you can imagine a big, about to my waist or maybe a little lower, stump, like a tree stump that's been hollowed out, like a bowl, like this. And then it's basically like a giant mortar and pestle. So there's a big stick with a weight on the end of it that's carved out of another branch of a tree, and it's made out of a very hard wood. And you would put this right in that bowl, and you would grind it, you know. You would have your giant weighted stick, and you would just grind this and grind this and grind this until you get to a dough stage. I have done that before. If I did that every day, would have a much more defined upper body area right now, because that is some hard work. So I am, blessed that I have a little bit of a helper right here. So this is going to make things a lot easier. And this is the meat grinder attachment. I'm just going to feed this right into it, and you'll see we're going to get masa out the other side. And I'm kind of trying to shake off as much of the water as I can, because I want to add some flavorful ingredients to make my dough with, which is the next step. So this is kind of, what I do with my company, Burning Cedar, is teaching these ancient techniques that we use with our specific varieties of corn. There's a lot of different, like I said, there's different types of corn, but there's also different species of corn. And almost every tribe has their own varieties of corn that they have had ancestral seeds passed down through generations that they plant and that they've brought from their homelands. So like the Cherokee people, we originated in the Appalachian region, and we were removed to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. And that's a story that many tribes have experienced. And it's not always the Trail of Tears. Every tribe had a trail that they followed, a removal road, where they were taken from land that they used to farm and brought to a new land. And they're not always able to plant their traditional crops and have them flourish, because it's not the land that those seeds find home. So that's something that I've learned about from the Pawnee Nation Seed Preservation Project. They have their ancestral seeds that they brought from their homeland of Nebraska. They brought those seeds to Oklahoma, and they tried to grow them on their reservation, and the seeds just wouldn't take. And they had this very small amount of seeds that they had saved over generations, you know, down to like a little bottle with 50 kernels of corn in it that they needed to preserve and bring back to life. And so my friend Deb Echohawk, she is the one that started this project just over probably 15 years ago now. And they contacted some farmers back in their ancestral homelands of Nebraska and asked if they could grow their corn there. And so they took that corn back and they planted it in that homeland, and the corn just flourished. And it came back, and they were able to take those varieties of corn that were almost extinct, and now they're thriving. And I buy cornmeal from them all the time. I buy kernels of corn to do dishes just like this. So that's what food sovereignty is about tribes being able to take those ancestral ingredients, bring them back to life if they're, you know, dying out, or bring them back to the people is the most important thing. We all know we can go to the store and buy corn, but it's important for us to be able to eat those corn varieties that are specific to our people because they're ancestors. We see these varieties of corn as part of our creation story. So there's so many ways that it's culturally important and spiritually important for our people to eat these foods. So that's what I try to share with everyone, is these recipes that we don't want to lose. And that's what this bean bread is. So I've got pretty much all of the corn all ground up, and you can see it's pretty doughy already. I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid to it, and the liquid I'm going to add is from this pot of beans, and this is where the bean in the bean bread comes from. So I've been cooking these beans for an hour or two, and these are just regular brown beans, pinto beans. Just like corn, we've got hundreds of varieties of beans that we can use. Cherokee people have a turtle bean. It's a black turtle bean that we use, or the black Trail of Tears bean. We've got all different kinds of beans. These are just a plain brown bean is what's usually used in this recipe. And I'll do 1 ladle. I'm going to get this guy so you can see. Get this out of the way. We're going to do 1 ladle with the beans. We'll do 2 ladles with the beans. We got plenty of beans here. And then I'm just going to take the broth. And so this is that flavorful broth. If you use nice, good quality, fresh beans, you get a really nice, flavorful broth when you cook them. And I'm just adding that, and that's the liquid I'm using to bring my dough together. And we just kind of smash it together like this. And I'm not adding any salt or any kind of seasoning to this because we're doing the truly traditional version of this dish. And the salt would cause it to kind of fall apart. So that's why this is not seasoned. At first I thought I was going to chef things up when I was making this old traditional recipe, and I added salt and some flavorings, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to really improve upon this ancient recipe that my ancestors handed down and make it better. And then I tried it, and my cakes just fell apart everywhere. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, there's a reason why all those aunties and grandmothers told me to make it this way. They were onto something. Sometimes you just don't mess with the recipes on things. So you see it's kind of come together into a dough ball here. And I should mention, we call this bean bread, but most breads in traditional recipes, at least, are really kind of more like a dumpling. If any of you have heard of grape dumplings, that's like definitely a Cherokee delicacy. It would be made the same kind of way, grinding corn, but instead of bean broth, I would use possum grape juice, which is wild grape that grows here. Nowadays, we use Welch's grape juice, and it makes this really beautiful, bright purple dumpling, and it's just simmered in the juice. And so the savory version here is what we're going to do. And that's where we kind of diverge from the tamale process, is we boil our dumplings instead of steaming them. But it's the same kind of thing. So I've had these corn husks soaking in some warm water to soften them. And we're just going to make a little bread patty out of this dough, just like this. So you see the kind of the similarities between this and a tamale. Basically, if we hadn't done the beans, if we had added lard and just hot water, and maybe some baking powder, that would be tamale masa. That would be the fresh tamale masa, the way that they make it in the old way in Mexico. But nowadays, people just use the instant masa harina that you get in the bag at the store. You can also make bean bread that way. I've done quick versions. You can see on my website, I've got burningscedar.com, and we've got lots of different videos that I post on there. And one of them is kind of the modern instant version of bean bread for people to use, and we use the masa flour. But this is the old way. So I've got a little patty right here, and I'm just going to wrap it up. And then I'm going to use a strip from that corn husk to tie it. And this is the only real tricky part, is these corn husks will tend to kind of break if you have a kind of weak spot on one. And if that happens, you can always just tear another strip. But that one's staying pretty good. So that's our little packet. And I'm going to make a few more here. See if I can get my water boiling. And so we call it bean bread when it's shaped like this. If you were to do kind of a longer, flatter shape like this, those are called broadswords. That's another name that this dish goes by, is broadswords. I'm going to squish that one up a little bit. Perfect. There we go. So we would just complete the rest of our batch by tying up all the rest of them like that. And then we just drop them into a pot of boiling water and let them simmer for a little bit. And if they open up, it's okay. The corn husk will pretty much keep it from going all over into your water there. Do a couple more. So like I said earlier, this would be something that would be served alongside like a nice hearty stew. And so another part of that, food sovereignty movement is being able to provide the ingredients like these for people to make traditional foods and to get back to a healthy way of eating, because as you can see, this is a pretty healthy dish. There's not a lot of fat, there's not a lot going on with it. A healthy stew with lean protein, whole grains, whole vegetables. That's the kind of diet that our people grew up on. They would forage for food, hunt for their game, and grow all of their own produce. And so that is, the most traditional and healthy diet. What happened along the lines there is that we were removed into areas, like I said, where the corn wouldn't grow, or the crops wouldn't grow, or there were no hunting grounds. There was no source of food for the amount of people that they had in a very small area. And so that led to tribes being reliant on the federal government for food, and that was where commodity foods came in. And so those were foods like, that government food box where you get the government cheese, the flour, the lard, the coffee, the sugar, refined sugar. And so all of those things were how we came about with recipes like fry bread, which is what people think of as Indian food now. But those recipes came out of survival mode, basically, taking everything that you had, like, the world's worst chopped mystery box, and coming up with something that would feed your family for it. And we sustained our families for generations on those foods. But we're trying to get back to making whole foods like this that get us back to that ancient diet that had us really healthy and strong, and getting away from the processed foods. And that's not something that's just for Indigenous people, that's for everyone, because all of these processed foods are what make our bodies weaker. So any kind of reconnection to where our food comes from, to the land that it's grown on, to the people that grow it, any kind of connection that you get to your food that way is good for your body, in a spiritual way and in, an actual vitamins and nutrients and, vital kind of way, in that way. So I have a finished product over here that I can show you guys, because those are going to boil for about an hour, and I don't have that much to say. I have a lot to say, but not enough for us to stand here for an hour and watch dumplings boil. But this is the final product. So I'm just going to slide this little ring off here and unwrap it for you. And these I made with some black turtle beans, so the dough actually has a really nice kind of dark blue color, which is cool. You can make them with the brown beans. This is the version that you get if you use black beans. And you can see it looks just like a tamale, basically. It's a nice tender piece of dough studded with those creamy beans, and you can just imagine dunking that into a big plate of venison stew and that being a really hearty and filling and healthy meal. So this is something that I feel like, you know, it's a process, definitely. You can see how our ancestors spent all day doing this kind of stuff if they were feeding a whole village. But really, you know, to kind of show the process that food goes to bring it to us and to get those nutrients into our body, I think it's an important thing for everyone to do in their homes rather than just opening a can, because it's important to know how these processes happen. And, you know, with some guidance, I think it would be a fun, you know, experiment for the family to do together too, to kind of see this reaction. It's like Mr. Wizard or, you know, Bill Nye the Science Guy over here with this corn, because you can see as the process is continuing as we've been talking, it's just got that brilliant color. That's the funnest part. So if anyone has questions, I would love to answer them. And if not, then that is it for me today. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me, everyone. It's been a beautiful day, and I hope you try this at home. If you want the recipe, I'll have it posted on burningscedar.com in the next few days. Love to see you guys. Thank you.